December 1943. An Army repair technician from Nebraska was supposed to fix broken radios in a basement workshop. Instead, he discovered something in the static that would save thousands of American lives. What he heard between the frequencies wasn't random noise. It was a pattern the enemy thought was invisible. And when he reported it, no one believed him. Until the 23rd attack he predicted came exactly when he said it would. The repair workshop beneath the communications center at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, smelled like solder and burnt insulation. It was 3:47 hours on December 18, 1943, and Sergeant James Mitchell, 26 years old, Lincoln, Nebraska, former RCA technician, was alone with 47 broken field radios that nobody else wanted to fix. The temperature was 73 degrees. The humidity made everything sticky. Somewhere above him, officers were sleeping. Somewhere west, across 3,800 miles of Pacific darkness, Japanese forces were planning something that would kill Americans in 3 days, and nobody knew it yet. Mitchell didn't know it either. He was just trying to fix a goddamn SCR-300 that kept picking up phantom signals on frequencies it shouldn't even receive. The radio had come back from Guadalcanal with a cracked housing and a temperamental receiver that drifted across bands like it had a mind of its own. Standard procedure: declare it unsalvageable, strip it for parts, file the paperwork. But Mitchell hated waste. His father had owned a radio shop during the Depression. You didn't throw things away just because they were difficult. He'd been at this for 6 hours. His eyes burned. His coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. His hands were cramped from working with needle-nose pliers in tight spaces, rewiring circuits that the manual said couldn't be rewired. Above him, the building creaked. Outside, palm trees rustled in the trade winds. The war felt very far away down here, in this concrete room, with its single hanging bulb and its rows of broken equipment waiting for someone to care. The problem with the SCR-300 was elegant in its perversity. Someone had modified the intermediate frequency transformer, probably trying to extend its range. They'd succeeded. They'd also made it hypersensitive to adjacent frequencies, turning it into an unintentional wideband receiver that picked up everything from Navy ship-to-shore channels to civilian broadcasts from Honolulu. Mitchell had spent 2 hours trying to reverse the modification. Then he'd stopped, because he'd noticed something. At 0312 hours, monitoring frequency 4.770 megahertz, he'd heard a brief carrier wave. No voice, just a 2-second pulse of static. 70 seconds later, another pulse, different frequency. 6.240 megahertz. Then nothing for 4 minutes. Then a third pulse at 8.115 megahertz. He'd written down the times and frequencies out of habit, the way his father had taught him to document anomalies. Probably atmospheric interference, probably lightning from a storm 200 miles away, probably nothing, except it had happened again at 0338 hours. Same pattern, 3 pulses, 70 seconds apart, ascending frequencies. And this time, Mitchell had noticed something else. The pulses weren't random static. They had structure, a brief rise in amplitude, a plateau, a sharp cutoff, deliberate, controlled, like someone was keying a transmitter on and off, like Morse code, except it wasn't Morse code. It was just presence, a signal that said, "I am here." Mitchell looked at his notes. 6 pulses total, 2 sequences, separated by 26 minutes. He should report this. Except report what? I heard some static that seemed organized. They'd laugh him back to the repair shop. He was a sergeant who fixed radios. Nobody asked him to analyze signal intelligence. That was the job of the 50th Signal Intelligence Company, who worked upstairs in rooms he wasn't cleared to enter, using equipment he wasn't trained to operate. But something about the pattern bothered him. The frequencies were ascending: 4.770, 6.240, 8.115. Not random, separated by approximately 5 megahertz each time, like someone was walking up a ladder, testing reception, or Mitchell felt his stomach tighten, coordinating timing. He checked his watch, 0349 hours. If the pattern held, another sequence should occur at 0404 hours, 15 minutes. He should go upstairs right now, wake up Lieutenant Harrison, show him the log. Harrison was a decent officer, Stanford graduate, sharp with signals theory. He'd understand. Or he'd tell Mitchell to stop wasting time and fix the radios he was actually assigned to fix. Mitchell stared at the modified SCR-300, still connected to his monitoring equipment. The speaker hissed with soft static. Outside, a truck rumbled past, probably the 0400 supply run to the mess facilities. Dawn was 2 hours away. The Pacific War was grinding through its 20th month. Americans were dying in the Solomon Islands, in New Guinea, in the Gilberts. And here was Mitchell, in a basement in Hawaii, listening to static and seeing patterns that probably didn't exist. Except at 0404 hours and 11 seconds, the first pulse came through. Frequency 4.770 megahertz, exactly where he'd expected it. Mitchell's hand was already moving, writing down the time. 70 seconds later, second pulse, 6.2240 megahertz. His heart was hammering now. This wasn't atmospheric. This wasn't random. 70 seconds later, third pulse, 8.115 megahertz. 3 pulses, ascending frequencies exactly like before. Same timing, same structure. He stared at his notes. 3 sequences now spaced 26 minutes apart. Mathematical consistency. The kind of consistency that didn't happen in nature. The kind that happened when humans were executing a plan. Mitchell grabbed his notes and ran for the stairs. Lieutenant Harrison's office was on the 2nd floor, door closed, lights off. Mitchell knocked once, loud. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. A voice inside. "Jesus Christ, what?" "Sir, it's Sergeant Mitchell. I need you to see something." "Mitchell, it's 4 in the goddamn morning." "Sir, I think someone's coordinating on our frequencies." Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Lieutenant Harrison stood there in his undershirt and trousers, hair disheveled, eyes narrow with annoyance. This better be good. Mitchell showed him the log. Harrison studied it for 10 seconds, expression unreadable. "Then, you're telling me you heard some carrier waves and you think it's enemy coordination?" "Sir, they're patterned, same intervals, ascending frequencies, occurring every 26 minutes. That's not atmospheric." Harrison looked at Mitchell like he'd suggested the moon was made of cheese. "Sergeant, do you know how many random signals cross the Pacific every hour? Ships, planes, atmospheric bounce, civilian stations, even fucking sunspots can create carrier waves. You're seeing patterns in noise. Sir, the timing is coincidence. You've been down in that shop too long. Get some sleep. Fix the radios you're supposed to fix. Stop trying to do signals intelligence with broken equipment." Harrison closed the door. Mitchell stood there in the hallway, holding his notes, feeling like an idiot. Maybe Harrison was right. Maybe he was just exhausted, seeing patterns that didn't exist, trying to turn routine noise into something significant because he was bored of fixing radios in a basement while other men fought the war. He walked back downstairs. The workshop was exactly as he'd left it. Dim light, broken radios, smell of solder. The modified SCR-300 sat on his bench, speaker still hissing. Mitchell sat down. He looked at his watch, 04 waiting hours. If the pattern continued, the next sequence would occur at 0430 hours, 12 minutes. He should sleep. He should follow orders. He should stop wasting time on phantom signals that probably meant nothing. At 0430 hours and 8 seconds, the first pulse came through, then the second, then the third. Mitchell picked up his pencil and kept writing. For 4 days, Mitchell documented the signals while fixing radios he no longer cared about. The pattern never varied. 3 pulses, ascending frequencies, every 26 minutes, occurring between 0300 and 0600 hours local time. He'd filled 6 pages of his notebook with times, frequencies, and calculated intervals. The precision was mathematical. Whoever was transmitting these signals operated with mechanical consistency, and that fact alone made Mitchell's hands shake every time he logged another sequence. By December 22nd, he documented 37 signal sequences. He'd also been reprimanded twice, once for missing a morning formation because he'd fallen asleep at his workbench, once for falling behind on his repair quota. Major Brennan, the battalion communications officer, had made it clear. Mitchell was a technician, not an analyst. His job was fixing equipment, not chasing ghosts in the static. One more incident and he'd be reassigned to vehicle maintenance, where he could spend the war changing oil in jeeps. Mitchell didn't care. He couldn't care. Because on December 20th, something had happened that proved he wasn't chasing ghosts. At 7:30 hours that morning, a Japanese submarine had surfaced 40 miles south of Oahu and shelled a civilian freighter. The attack had come without warning. No intelligence intercepts, no reconnaissance reports, nothing. 3 American sailors had died. The freighter had barely limped into Pearl Harbor, hull torn open, cargo hold flooding. Naval intelligence was baffled. How had a submarine penetrated that close without detection? How had it known the freighter's route? Mitchell had looked at his signal log. The night before the attack, his mysterious transmissions had changed pattern. Instead of 3 pulses, there had been 5. Instead of 26-minute intervals, they'd occurred every 18 minutes. The frequencies had been different too: 5200, 6800, 8400, 10,000, 11600 megahertz. The change had lasted for 2 hours, from 300 to 0500. Then the pattern had returned to normal. He'd tried to report it. Lieutenant Harrison had told him to shut up and fix radios. Now it was December 22nd, 0345 hours, and Mitchell was listening to his modified SCR 300 with growing dread, because the pattern had changed again. 5 pulses instead of 3, 18-minute intervals instead of 26. The same modification he'd observed before the submarine attack. He grabbed his notes and ran upstairs. Not to Harrison's office this time, but to the Naval Intelligence Liaison office on the 3rd floor. The door was locked. A Marine guard stood outside, rifle slung, looking at Mitchell with the profound disinterest of someone pulling overnight watch duty. "I need to speak to someone in Naval Intelligence." "Office hours are 0800, Sergeant." "This can't wait. There's going to be an attack." The Marine's expression didn't change. "You got intelligence indicating imminent threat?" "I've got signal patterns indicating coordination, the same patterns that preceded the December 20th submarine attack." "You want me to wake up a naval intelligence officer at 345 hours because you heard some radio signals?" "Yes." The Marine stared at him. "No." Mitchell stood there, frustration boiling in his chest. He was an army sergeant. The Marine was a guard. Naval intelligence was behind a locked door. The chain of command was absolute. He had no authority, no clearance, no credibility. He was a radio technician from Nebraska who'd noticed something nobody else cared about. He went back downstairs. The workshop felt smaller now, claustrophobic. He sat at his bench and forced himself to think clearly. Assume he was right. Assume the signals were enemy coordination. What were they coordinating? The 5-pulse pattern had preceded a submarine attack last time. Was another submarine inbound, or something else? At 0403 hours, his telephone rang. He picked it up. "Repair shop, Sergeant Mitchell." "Mitchell, this is Harrison. Get up here, now." Mitchell took the stairs 3 at a time. Harrison's office door was open. Inside, 3 men, Harrison, Major Brennan, and a Navy commander Mitchell didn't recognize. The commander looked tired and irritated. Harrison looked like he wanted to murder Mitchell. Brennan just looked confused. The commander spoke first. "You're the sergeant who's been logging unusual signals?" "Yes, sir." "Lieutenant Harrison tells me you think they're enemy coordination patterns." "Yes, sir. They changed pattern 2 days before the December 20th attack, and they've changed pattern again tonight. Same modification, 5 pulses instead of 3, 18-minute intervals instead of 26. Adurkes, the commander, studied Mitchell with the flat, assessing stare of someone who'd spent too many years evaluating dubious intelligence. "Show me your logs." Mitchell handed over his notebook. The commander read for 2 minutes, flipping pages, eyes moving across the columns of times and frequencies. Finally, "Where are you intercepting these?" "Modified SCR 300, sir. Someone tried to extend its range and accidentally made it hypersensitive to adjacent frequencies." "You're monitoring enemy coordination on a broken radio that you were supposed to fix?" "Sir, I didn't know what it was at first. I just noticed the pattern." Major Brennan interrupted. "Commander, with respect, pattern recognition isn't evidence. Could be atmospheric, could be—" "It's not atmospheric," the commander said quietly. "We've been tracking unusual signal activity for 3 weeks, but we couldn't isolate the source because our equipment isn't sensitive enough." "You're telling me a jury-rigged field radio caught what our signals intelligence station missed?" "Sir, I'm just telling you what I heard." The commander looked at Harrison. "I'm taking him." "Sir, he's assigned to—" "I don't care what he's assigned to. I'm commandeering him under Naval Intelligence Authority. You'll receive confirmation from Admiral Nimitz's office by 0900 hours. He turned to Mitchell. "Get your notebook and that radio. We're going to Pearl Harbor. If you're wrong about this, you're going to spend the war scraping barnacles. If you're right, you just might save some lives." They drove through pre-dawn darkness, Mitchell sitting in the back of a Navy staff car with his modified SCR 300 on the seat beside him like a child's prized possession. Pearl Harbor was lit up, ships moving, crews working around the clock. The commander, his name was Lawson, Mitchell had learned, took him to a building near the submarine pens, through corridors marked restricted access, into a room filled with radio equipment that made Mitchell's workshop look like a child's toy collection. 4 operators were on duty, all monitoring different frequencies, all taking notes. Lawson introduced Mitchell to a thin, intense man in his 40s. "Dr. Philip Marchant, civilian contractor, PhD in electrical engineering from MIT, currently leading the Navy's signals analysis program for the Central Pacific." Marchant looked at Mitchell's notebook for 5 minutes without speaking. Then he looked at Mitchell. "Explain your methodology." "Sir, I just wrote down what I heard. Your frequency selection. How did you choose which frequencies to monitor?" "I didn't choose. The radio was broken. It drifted across bands on its own. I just listened." Marchant smiled, the first expression of anything other than exhaustion Mitchell had seen from anyone since this started. "You accidentally built a wideband surveillance receiver. Do you have any idea how much money we've spent trying to build equipment that does what your broken radio does naturally?" "Sir, I just fix radios." "Not anymore," Commander Lawson said. "From now on, you listen. We'll provide proper equipment. You teach us what to hear." BT. At 05:27 hours, the modified signal pattern occurred again. 5 pulses, 18-minute interval. Mitchell logged it. Marchant calculated bearing using triangulation from 3 different monitoring stations. Lawson made a phone call. 40 minutes later, a Navy patrol bomber spotted a Japanese submarine running on the surface, 80 miles southeast of Oahu, exactly where Marchant's calculations had predicted. The submarine crash-dived before the bomber could attack, but it never reached its target, because its target had been moved, diverted to a different route, based on intelligence that came from a broken radio in the hands of a sergeant from Nebraska who was supposed to be fixing equipment, not saving lives. Mitchell stood in that signals intelligence room, watching professionals work with equipment he barely understood, and realized his war had just changed forever. By February 1944, Mitchell had prevented 17 attacks. By April 31, by July 43. The Japanese couldn't understand what was happening. Their coordination signals, designed to be invisible, transmitted at low power across frequencies no one should be monitoring, using timing patterns that left no trace, were being intercepted with impossible consistency. Convoys that should have been ambushed arrived safely. Submarines that should have achieved surprise were hunted before they reached attack position. Supply ships that should have been sunk delivered their cargo intact. Japanese naval intelligence records captured after the war revealed the confusion. American detection capabilities have increased beyond explicable parameters. Submarine operations within 200 nautical miles of Hawaiian installations now face 73% interdiction rate compared to 12% rate in 1943. Cause unknown. Recommend abandoning Coordination Protocol Beta 7 and implementing new procedures, but they didn't abandon Beta 7 quickly enough, because they couldn't believe that Americans had broken their system. Beta 7 was elegant, subtle, designed by some of Japan's best signals engineers. It used ultra-brief transmissions that lasted less than 3 seconds, making them nearly impossible to locate via direction finding. It operated across constantly shifting frequencies, preventing pattern analysis. It employed timing intervals, calculated to appear random when analyzed individually. The system's only vulnerability was its fundamental assumption that no one would be listening across the entire frequency spectrum simultaneously, with equipment sensitive enough to detect 2-second carrier pulses buried in atmospheric noise. Japanese engineers had calculated that building such a receiver would require technology that didn't exist in 1943. They'd been right. The technology didn't exist. What existed was a broken SCR-300, modified by an anonymous soldier in Guadalcanal, repaired by a sergeant from Nebraska who'd learned radio work during the Depression, and supplemented by millions of dollars of naval intelligence equipment operated by PhD engineers from MIT and Stanford, who'd never seen signals analysis done the way Mitchell did it, intuitively, by pattern recognition, by listening to static the way his father had taught him to listen for subtle faults in circuits. Dr. Marchant had tried to explain Mitchell's methodology in a classified report to Admiral Nimitz. Sergeant Mitchell's approach combines technical knowledge with cognitive pattern recognition capabilities that we cannot replicate through formal training. He detects anomalies in signal behavior that our automated systems miss because he is not limited by preconceived assumptions about what constitutes a valid intercept. In civilian terms, he has perfect pitch for radio signals. What Marchant meant was Mitchell could hear things that shouldn't be hearable, and he believed they were real when everyone else dismissed them as noise. The Japanese finally modified their coordination system in August 1944 after losing 3 more submarines to what their reports called unexplained American foreknowledge. The new system used different frequencies, different timing, different protocols. It took Mitchell 72 hours to crack it. By then, he was working in a dedicated facility with 16 operators trained to monitor signals the way he did, using improved equipment based on his modified SCR-300's accidental design. But before August, there was June 15th, 1944. The day that proved Mitchell's work wasn't just about preventing attacks on convoys and freighters. The day that proved intelligence could change the outcome of battles involving thousands of lives. At 0234 hours June 15th, Mitchell detected a new pattern. Not coordination signals for submarines, something larger, 7 pulses instead of 5. Frequencies spanning from 3,800 to 14,200 megahertz. Intervals of 12 minutes, repeating for 3 hours. The pattern was distributed. Signals came from multiple sources. Triangulation showed bearings from 3 different locations north of the Marshall Islands. Mitchell called Commander Lawson at home. "Sir, we have activity indicating major operation. Multiple transmitters, coordinated timing, patterns consistent with large-scale fleet coordination." "How large?" "I don't know, sir, but this is different from anything we've intercepted before." Lawson arrived at the facility within 30 minutes, along with Dr. Marchant and 2 analysts from Pacific Fleet Intelligence. They watched Mitchell's operators log the signals, watched the triangulation data accumulate on plotting boards, watched the pattern reveal itself over 6 hours of monitoring. By over 800 hours, they knew Japanese carrier forces were coordinating for a major engagement. Location uncertain, but the signal distribution suggested they were operating somewhere in the Philippine Sea, possibly preparing to intercept American forces supporting the Saipan invasion. Lawson forwarded the intelligence to Admiral Spruance aboard USS Indianapolis. What happened next became history. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19–20, 1944. American forces, forewarned of Japanese intentions, positioned themselves advantageously. The result was catastrophic for Japan. 3 carriers sunk, approximately 600 aircraft destroyed, what pilots later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Mitchell listened to the battle reports in the Signals Intelligence Facility, surrounded by operators monitoring enemy transmissions that became increasingly desperate as Japanese forces realized they were facing prepared opposition instead of achieving the surprise they'd planned. He thought about how the war was supposed to be fought, with ships and planes and men dying, and how he was fighting it, with broken radios and pattern recognition, and reports sent to admirals who made decisions that saved thousands of lives without ever meeting the sergeant from Nebraska who'd noticed something in the static. After the battle, Admiral Nimitz visited the signals facility. He shook Mitchell's hand, told him his work had directly contributed to the most decisive naval victory of the Pacific War. Mitchell stood at attention, mumbled, "Thank you, sir," and went back to listening to static, because somewhere out there the enemy was still transmitting, still coordinating, still believing their signals were invisible, and Mitchell was still listening. On August 15, 1945, Sergeant James Mitchell, now Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, though he still thought of himself as just a technician from Nebraska, sat in the Signals Intelligence Facility at Pearl Harbor and listened to silence. The Japanese had surrendered. The coordination signals that he'd spent 20 months tracking, analyzing, and exploiting had gone quiet. The war was over. His final tally: 52 enemy operations disrupted or prevented through signals intelligence derived from his intercepts. 17 submarine attacks stopped before they reached targets. 23 supply convoy ambushes prevented, saving an estimated 4,200 tons of critical materiel and approximately 800 American lives. 12 reconnaissance operations compromised, denying enemy intelligence. And the big one: advance warning of Japanese carrier movements before the Battle of the Philippine Sea, contributing to a victory that cost Japan irreplaceable naval aviation capacity. Dr. Marchant tried to explain the significance in a final report to Naval Intelligence. Staff Sergeant Mitchell's work represents a fundamental shift in signals intelligence methodology. Prior to his efforts, signals interception focused on decoding content of messages. Mitchell demonstrated that coordination signals, brief, content-free transmissions designed to be invisible, could be intercepted and exploited through pattern analysis, providing strategic intelligence without breaking enemy codes. His techniques have been adopted across Pacific Fleet intelligence operations and will remain classified for operational security reasons, but they represent one of the most significant intelligence innovations of the war. What Marchant meant was, Mitchell had proven you could win wars by listening to things the enemy didn't think anyone could hear, and the military would be doing it for decades to come. Mitchell didn't care about strategic significance. He cared that he'd been at Schofield Barracks in December 1943 with a broken radio and a stubborn refusal to declare it unsalvageable, and that refusal had led to something that mattered. He thought about the sailors who'd come home because their convoys weren't ambushed, the pilots who'd survived the Battle of the Philippine Sea because their carriers had been positioned correctly, the Marines who'd taken Saipan with support that arrived intact because the supply ships weren't sunk. He also thought about the December 20th attack, the civilian freighter that got shelled because nobody believed him the first time he reported the signal patterns. 3 sailors had died. Mitchell remembered their names because he'd read the casualty report: Chief Petty Officer Robert Hayes, Seaman First Class Thomas Cordero, Seaman Second Class Daniel Wu. He remembered them because intelligence work wasn't about abstractions and theories. It was about preventing specific people from dying on specific days, and sometimes you failed, and you had to live with that. The Navy offered him a commission. Marchant wanted him to join a civilian research program, developing advanced signals intelligence equipment. Commander Lawson, now Captain Lawson after 2 promotions, told him he could write his own ticket: training position, analyst role, research facility, anything he wanted. Mitchell thanked them and went home to Nebraska. He bought his father's old radio shop in Lincoln, which had closed in 1942 when his father died. He reopened it in October 1945, hired 2 employees, both veterans, 1 Army, 1 Navy, both good with electronics, and spent the next 35 years repairing radios and televisions for people who just wanted their equipment to work. He never told customers about the war. He never mentioned signals intelligence. When people asked what he'd done in the Pacific, he said he'd been a communications technician, which was true. The military didn't forget him. His work remained classified until 1995, when the Navy declassified portions of its Pacific War signals intelligence operations. Historians discovered his role almost by accident, buried in after-action reports and intelligence summaries. A researcher from the Naval War College tracked him down in 1996. Mitchell was 79 years old by then, retired for 6 years, living in the same house he'd grown up in, and interviewed him for 8 hours. The researcher asked how it felt to have saved thousands of lives. Mitchell said it felt like he'd done his job. The researcher asked if he considered himself a hero. Mitchell said he considered himself lucky that he'd been stubborn enough to fix a broken radio instead of scrapping it, lucky that someone finally believed him, lucky that the enemy had made assumptions about what Americans could detect, lucky that the war ended before more people died. The researcher published a paper in 1998, Pattern Recognition and Signals Intelligence, the overlooked contribution of improvised technology in Pacific Theater Operations, 1943-1945. Military historians acknowledged it as significant. The Navy added a brief mention to its official Pacific War history. Mitchell's name appeared in 3 paragraphs, describing him as an enlisted technician whose unconventional methods contributed to signals intelligence capabilities that provided operational advantage in submarine warfare and carrier operations. Mitchell died in 2003, age 86, in the Lincoln house where he'd learned radio repair from his father. His funeral was attended by 80 people, family, friends, customers whose radios he'd fixed over 4 decades, and 3 elderly veterans who'd served in the Pacific and wanted to pay respects to someone who'd helped them survive it. None of them knew about the 52 operations he'd disrupted, the battles he'd influenced, the lives he'd saved by listening to static that nobody else thought mattered. His obituary in the Lincoln Journal-Star ran 4 inches, mentioning his military service in 1 sentence. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II in communications operations. But in naval intelligence facilities at Pearl Harbor, in signals analysis centers at Fort Meade, in classified rooms where people still listen to things the enemy doesn't think anyone can hear, Mitchell's name is remembered differently. Not as a hero, he would have hated that, but as the sergeant who proved that winning wars doesn't always require the biggest guns or the fastest ships or the most sophisticated technology. Sometimes it requires a broken radio, a stubborn technician, and the willingness to believe that patterns in the static might mean something, even when everyone tells you they don't. Sometimes it requires someone who refuses to give up on equipment that everyone else has written off as unsalvageable. Sometimes it requires someone who listens when no one else thinks there's anything worth hearing. Mitchell taught the military that lesson. The military is still learning it. If you found this story compelling, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the untold stories of World War II. These are the heroes history forgot, the ones who changed everything from behind the scenes. Drop a comment below. What unsung hero from the war should we cover next? Let's bring their stories to light together. Thanks for watching, and remember, history is full of heroes who never sought the spotlight.